Give you a few minutes. Oh, it's so lovely to see you all snuggling down. Okay, let's just have a quick. This is a story that I've been telling for many years. And if any of you know the Fens, yeah? The flat fens with all of their dikes. Well, I'm going to take you back to a time before the draining of the fens, a long time ago, when the communities lived on the fens and they made their living on the fens by cutting peat or the reeds or anything else that was there. But they also depended on the moon. So once upon a time, a long time ago, when people worked on the land a lot more than they do now, when the fens were full of water and paths that went through them that had been made by the people, but which changed all the time, when people, well, they had a different way of believing maybe then. Because although most of the people were good Christian people, they also feared. They feared what went on in the fens. They feared the black, murky waters, the black pools, the sound of the squelching as they walked across the bogland. They feared what came after dark. They feared the dead hands, the witches, the bogles, the bogarts, the will-o'-the-wisps, all of these things that would come after dark, creeping up out of the marshes, out and towards the villagers. Now the villagers felt fine as long as the beautiful moon shone down on them from the sky. When she was at her fullest, they were at their happiest. But when she was at their darkest, they waited. They put a piece of straw in their hat. They held hazel in their pockets. And they waited just for the couple of days before that thin sliver returned. And they felt a bit more able to go out at night. Well, our story starts with the moon, really, because the moon would shine down so brightly and beautifully and just so generous in her luminescence. But she had heard that the people on the fens, well, they really depended on her like nobody else did because of the evil that lurked in the bogs and the marshes. And she decided that she would go down and see this for herself. So when it was the dark of the moon, she put on a black cloak to go over her head. She put it round her shoulders and she went down into the fens. And she started to walk across those fens and she could smell that smell of rotting vegetation each time she put her foot down, and she could hear the squelching and the bubbles underneath and between her toes, and she was starting to get an idea of what must be happening, but there was some light coming out from underneath her cloak. So the creatures of the dark, they stayed away. But at one point, as she was walking past the big pool, one of her feet slipped down into the pool and she caught hold of an old snag. And she tried to pull her foot back out of the pool, but something had hold of her by the ankle. She kept pulling, and as she held on to this snag, it was like it wrapped itself around her wrists, and she was caught fast, and the harder she tried to escape, the harder she was stuck. Her hood flew over her head, and she was stuck. She struggled and she struggled and she struggled until she had no energy left, and she didn't know what to do. But then she heard something. She heard the sound of a human voice. Help! Help! She could hear the direction it was coming from, and she knew that without her light, this man, he would lose his way. So she struggled some more, and she threw back her head, and her hood fell off her head, and suddenly there was light flooded all over the marshes, and the man obviously saw where he was about to walk into one of the pools, and he set off. And he set off in that light until he was home and snug next to his fire. But not so the moon. The moon, once she knew he was safe, and she knew that she could not struggle anymore, and they started to come, the dead hands and the Bogarts and the witches, and they prodded and they poked, and they swore at her for keeping them away all the time with her bright light. And they came up with a plan. They decided that they would have a stone there, a big stone, and they would put it on top of her to keep her down, and they would keep some will-o'-the-wisps, little methane that lights up. They would keep those on either side of this snag to keep an eye on her. And that would be that. So they did just that. They put that stone on the poor moon. She could not get out. Well, back in the village, they waited. They waited until they thought, right, the new moon is going to come tonight. And it didn't come. And it didn't come the following night, and it didn't come the following night, and it didn't come for 2 weeks, when now the moon should have been full in the sky, and they couldn't go out. They could hear the creatures getting closer and closer to their door. So they huddled together in the inn, and they decided they would go and see the wise woman who lived on the side of on the edge of the village. And they went to see her, and she heard, and she had seen, and she said, I know what this is. I have scried in my mirror. I have looked in my books. If you hear anything, come back, but I have nothing to suggest. So they went away, and they stayed in the inn, and they kept salt across the doorways to keep the evil things out. But one night, there was a stranger in the pub, and he heard tell of all the conversation. And he stood up and he said, listen to me. He said, I did not realize until now, but I think I saw the moon. And he explained what he had seen that night as he tried to cross the marshes. Well, all the people, they came together, and they went back to the old woman, and they told her, listen, this man, he has seen her. And the old woman, she started to scry again in her mirror. And she looked in her book, and she said to them, listen well to me. You must put a pebble in your mouth. You must put a hazel wand rolled into a circlet into your pocket. And you must go out onto the marshes together. And you must find a coffin, a cross, and a candle. I can say no more. Well, the people, they went home. They hugged their loved ones. They put a pebble in their mouth, and they took the hazel wand, and they rolled it up into a circlet, and they put it in their pocket. And then they went out to the edge of the marshes, and they held hands. The men and the women of that village, they walked out into the marshes. They knew their way, but they had torches. And they walked and they walked, and they used those torches to try and light the way. One of them said, look, is that not a cross with a candle? And they made their way round the black pool, all the way round, and there was a snag that looked like a cross, and there was a will-o'-the-wisp that looked like a candle, and there was the stone that looked like a coffin. Well, they gathered round, and they pushed and they pushed and they pulled, and it was so stuck, this stone, and they wobbled it backwards and forwards until finally they lifted it, And as they lifted it away, this shaft of light just came up into their faces, and they all looked down into the hole. And there was the most beautiful face they had ever seen in their lives, for there was the face of the moon. And no sooner had they seen it than she was up, and back up into the sky. And there she was, shining down on them. And the people, they celebrated. They went home and they opened their doors, because they knew. You could hear the creatures of the marshes. They were screaming and scrawning and moaning and groaning, because now they had to go back into that black water, the stagnant waters of the marsh, when the people were safe. And from that time on, they say that the moon shines stronger and brighter on the people of the fens than anywhere else in the world. So that is, it's a very rich story. But before we discuss it, we're going to give you just a few minutes to write a few reflections down, things that you, images or parts of the story that you resonated with you. And then we're going to go into what images stood out for you. That's the one. And then we're going to go into our cozy rooms and do what we did last week. So have a little share with each other, and then come back and talk some more about it. So just have a few minutes of writing what images stood out for you. Differences that are within us, because we are masculine and we are feminine. And it's when those things get out of balance that things go awry. And the feminine is represented by softness, by gentleness, by nurturing, by circles, by spirals, by emotion, by intuition, by wisdom. And we are more, I say we, the feminine is more about being, whereas the masculine is perceived as being much more linear and action-based and all to do with the doing. So the two of them are very different, which is why sometimes if we're out of balance and we're too feminine, you know, we don't get things done. We go round and round in circles all the time, and we don't have that ability to do. We're very good at just being, but we can't even sit in our being properly because we're beating ourselves up because we're not doing. You know, it's like, so it's so easy for it to get out of balance within ourselves, but also we are part of cycles. So we are part of, within us, we have the cycle of the moon, we have the cycle of the seasons, but we also have the kind of political cycles which hold us as well. And they have to be masculine and feminine too. So with the patriarchy, you know, neither the masculine or the feminine have come into balance under that, because it is so masculine. And so it depends on which level you're looking at it. Like you were talking very much, Sarah, about relating your own thoughts in terms of trying to work out the eating aspects within that, which is like, that's great, you know, because there is that darkness, the dark and the light, you know, the duality in all of these things. But there's also that on the, so that's on the macro, on the micro, on the really small scale. On the big scale, the patriarchy, and how it oppresses the feminine all the time. So you could also look at the bog as being the patriarchy, the kind of the worst aspects of when the masculine is out of balance, you know, that it oppresses the female, that the voice of the female is not heard. So the moon comes down, and like you said, whether she came down, you know, whether she came down to kind of see what it was like. I mean, she'd heard that all these horrible things were there, and she couldn't believe that this was so, really. So she was curious, you know, let's go and have a look myself. But she'd never anticipated that it was as awful as it was. And that was what got her, was her curiousness and her innocence, in a sense. You know, it's much easier to kind of pull something down if it's unaware of unaware of what might be there, to, you know, what the traps might be, in that sense. So the moon represents the feminine in this story, and the whole cycle. And when we talked about the new moon and the full moon at the beginning, and how as we go around either the wheel of the year, or we go around the directions in our own circle, we can see each of those aspects in ourselves. And the ones that I related them to tonight were about reflection and release, and really setting positive intentions and things like that. But when you have your voice suppressed, or your actions suppressed by something, pulled down into the mire, then you can't be in control of yourself anymore in that way. So whatever aspect that is, it's like the demons in the last story. You know, it's about fighting our demons. But you're so right in saying that feminine is when it's out of balance as well, it's about helping everybody regardless of oneself, you know. And we all become martyrs when we're out of balance, that we have to do things for other people, we have to protect other people, and in that way, and not in the way that the masculine is about fixing things, whereas the feminine is about giving of oneself in order to protect them. So there is always that's not about us, that can be from the outside, somebody who's told you to shut up, or somebody who's just, you know, you're not allowed to speak your truth, be your authentic self. But also to recognize that, yes, like who was it that said the balance of the masculine and the feminine, when they came together, that cooperation comes from there being balance. But that is, again, that's a feminine trait and a masculine trait when they come together and work together in that way. So there are many things in this story which relate to imbalance and coming into balance. And the old woman, even she, in the first place, she couldn't do anything. There wasn't enough, because she didn't have any information. And it's very interesting that the man in the story, he acted completely as an individual. He knew what had happened, or he didn't know it was the moon, but he went off, went home, sat by his fire, didn't think to share that with anybody. It was only at a certain point when there was a crisis that he went, oh, actually, I think I may know what the answer is to this. So he acted very much as an individual, and that's another aspect of the masculine and the feminine, that between the cooperation and working as an individual.